Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this MIT Alumni Association webinar. Thank you for your patience with us getting started, and we apologize for the short delay. But thank you for joining us for the Career Lunch and Learn program today. The topic will be economic insights for dealing with uncertainty related to COVID-19. This is being brought to you by the MIT Alumni Association and is sponsored in part by the MIT Federal Credit Union, MIT Professional Education, and MIT Sloan Executive Education. My name is Diana Chen. I'm a PhD alumna from the class of 2016, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's program. To share a little bit more about myself, I completed a PhD in the microbiology program, which is a very small interdisciplinary PhD program. And my current position is still at MIT. I run an organization called the MIT Communication Lab, where we train grad students and postdocs to serve as peer-to-peer communication coaches for everyone from undergrads through staff. So we work on professional communication, technical communication, and more broadly in the fields of mentorship, conflict management, and other skills that are really important for today's technical graduates. And an observation that I can share with my close experiences lately with all the grad students and postdocs whom we mentor is that despite having one of the world's best technical educations, everyone is really feeling the effects of uncertainty about what is going to happen next. Not only what will the next academic year look like, but of course the bigger questions like when will we have a vaccine? What will the economy look like for the next few years? And so I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're grateful to anyone who can bring us deeper insights into what we might expect from the near future. So I'm excited for today's webinar topic and happy to be serving as your moderator. Some technical notes. As a reminder, our webinar is being broadcast live today. Throughout the program, you can submit your questions using the Q&A feature that's located in your Zoom toolbar. For listeners joining via YouTube, you can add your questions to the comments field. All questions will be held until the end of the presentation. With that, I'm very pleased today to introduce your speaker, Arvind Govindarajan. Arvind is a partner at McKinsey & Company in their Boston office. He is a member of their financial institution risk and advanced analytics practice. His areas of expertise and experience include advanced analytics, including big data and machine learning, credit risk, collections, pre-provision net revenue modeling, comprehensive capital analysis and review, corporate risk assessment and modeling, and enterprise risk management. Arvind graduated from MIT with a PhD in biology in 2005 and received his undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto, Scarborough. Arvind, welcome and thank you for being with us today. We look forward to learning from you.
Thanks, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? I'll take that as yes. Couple of the notes. I think I was at MIT for a solid 12 years in course 7 and a bit in course 9. I actually also stayed around at the Picower Institute from 2005 to 2010, working on various things in learning and memory. Very, very fond of my time there, and I still visit the lab if possible in Susumu Tonegawa's lab to see what crazy stuff he's up to these days. Still a fantastic world. And one of the things we learned in neuroscience back in the day, and I think a lot of you know it as well, is that humans are amazingly bad at risk management because of a range of cognitive biases that we all have. Things like focusing on recency, things like anchoring to past history that we're familiar with, things like analysis paralysis because of all the data we're exposed to. And in large part, what we've been doing on COVID-19 is attempting to allow all of us to make decisions using data, using analytics, using scenarios to kind of get us away from the paralysis that can happen when one is confronted with these kind of novel cases. And that's hopefully what I can describe some of today. And I am hoping for a lot of questions at the end, so please fire away. I'm happy to answer anything and everything that people ask. And I think the way we frame it is actually on the next page. So Evie, if you can go to the next slide. What we call this problem is basically safeguarding our lives and our livelihoods, the imperative of our time. Why is that? Because we're stuck in a problem where we essentially do two things at the same time. One of them is that we want to understand, how to protect our health, but at the same time, we need to figure out how to protect our economy as well. And this dual challenge that we face is quite hard, and that's why we think it's thinking about both at the same time is imperative. If you go to the next slide, I just want to point out one thing. I think as we think about all of the events unfolding, I think we should not forget. I think, and this is something that all of us are capable of forgetting, just because we are all caught up in the day-to-day events. This is a global humanitarian challenge, and we just don't want people to forget that element of it. Tons of health professionals are at risk. Governments, industry are working hard on various aspects. Companies around the world are working hard. NGOs are working hard. And we just want to make sure that everyone remembers. And this, again, is something we learned in neuroscience. Sometimes these things are easy to forget when you're caught up in other things. That this is a huge global humanitarian challenge, and we ask that everyone remember that. If you go to the numbers on the next page, it is truly astounding. It's virtually hit every part of the world. We've had over 300,000 deaths. About almost 5 million people have been reported as having the disease. And just to confirm, that is probably an underestimate, because many people have no symptoms, which means that the 5 million is probably a smaller figure than one might expect. There are some useful things to think about as well, though, in that the places where most of the new cases and deaths are happening is slowly changing over time, which means that in a given country, there is not just a hope, but a reality that you can actually start to bend the curve and start to reduce the level of disease in a given location. If you go to the next page, just a quick version, you can see the various kind of centers of where the disease turns out to be in terms of reported cases. We all know it started in Asia, but if you look at the hotspots now, they're in fairly populous zones like the US, like Europe, like Brazil, Russia, etc. So the kind of focus has changed from where it used to be to where it is now, as two things happen. The disease itself spreads, as well as different countries start to amplify their testing methodologies, etc., to be able to count the cases that they actually have. Now, what's interesting about this is on the next page, and this in some sense, hopefully will start to get us closer to how to deal with this and how to think about the various scenarios. In general, countries with the widest testing tend to have the fewest cases per capita. So the common belief is that the more I test, the more cases I'll find. That may be true, but the flip side is also true. The more you test, the less it spreads, because you're able to control it. So if you put all of it together, what ends up coming out of it is that you end up with more testing equals a better outcome in terms of actually case spreading as well. And the last comment I'll make on this one is, actually we can skip the next page. We'll actually go to 2 pages from here. What's also very important to understand is that many countries started with similar trajectories, but the curves have diverged significantly based on what people have done. So if we take a look at some of the East Asian countries, and we all talk about China, but let's talk about a couple other ones as well. If you look at South Korea, if you look at Taiwan, we look at Hong Kong, and to some extent Singapore as well, though they've had some recent issues. What you basically find is that you can actually bend the curve effectively. And in some of those countries, they didn't actually ever enter a full lockdown. What they managed to do was a massive amount of testing. And odd as it may sound, the testing per capita is only one of the numbers. You have to take the testing per capita into account against the number of cases you actually have to get the right number of tests you actually need. The second one is they're able to do contact tracing, so they can find all of the exposed people very, very fast and do this in a risk-adjusted fashion. And they're very, very good in micro-quarantining. And what I mean by that is if you are near somebody who's been exposed, all of you are then forced to go into quarantine. And what they have done effectively there is to have a national strategy, if you will, that is adopted by not just the individuals, but also corporations, etc. Why is that adherence is a key element of this. So it kind of acts societally friendly fashion. An element of it also is that you as a worker have to be confident that if you get quarantined, that your job is safe when you're back in 2 weeks from quarantine, that you get back to your work, and that everyone behaves in a fashion that allows you to go such quarantines. It's a little bit like duty. You go on jury duty now and you're asked to serve. When you come back, your job is still there. Why? Because we have agreed that it's an essential part of society. In East Asia, they've agreed that quarantine for disease is important thing they've basically done. If you go to the next page, elements of what seems to, and of course, predictably, you can't always tell if all of these things are required to the same extent because many countries do all of these, but the singular kind of tests of each one themselves is not doing that. Distancing is clear. Measure this value R, which is the infectivity of a given person. The more distance you have between people, the lower it gets. Travels are also what people have done in part to kind of create small zones within which they can control the disease. Testing and tracking I also talked about. And the last but not is the need to keep places clean so that the disease does not continue to spread throughout the population. So that's kind of the health aspects. And the reason we look at this is because in many the curve has been bent, and we're starting to see at least some movement in the reduction of cases that arise during the reopening. We don't have good cases like we have in parts of Asia, or is it to have outbreaks we need to control? And we're going to talk about a little bit of that coming up. But one is Singapore, controlled disease in most of the country, but it turned out that in worker dormitories for migrants had more trouble doing that, as a result, which they've had some outbreaks they've had to control. Let's go to the economic next. If you go to the next slide, Evie. And I can skip past this one. This basically points out that the stringency of been quite different in various places. In spite of the fact that most of the world is locked down, what's actually happening is not the case. Some places are very locked down and some places are not, based partly on what the individuals are, as well as how people are into the different rules. Next page, please. So let's know how this actually works. So essentially what we have is the following. On the rows, what we have is the public health response. The top row cases like East Asia, you have a single kind of lockdown period or none. The virus is controlled and the economy can return to some type of normal, not the same as the previous normal, but some type of normal that allows all of us to go to work. The middle row is one where it's not as optimistic. We do control the virus. We do return back to work, but the virus comes back, either in the entire country or in portions of the country. And we're forced to undergo further lockdowns or similar kind of economic damage as a result of the virus coming back to some chunk of the economy. The last row is one that we do think happens in some emerging markets where the virus actually goes throughout the country, as a result of which you get mass amounts of viral spread, disease, and death. And while one hopes that's not the case, we do believe that unfortunately in some countries that's going to be the case. Now, the bad news with all of this is even if you control the virus in the first two rows, the flip side is that you're creating huge economic damage, as we all are seeing. For example, even this morning, we had another few million jobs that seem to have gone away temporarily at least, resulting in 40 million total jobs so far that may have been lost. Some got regained, but 40 million is a sizable number. So what can government do about that? Here I'm going to talk about the columns and really talk about the middle column first. The middle column is the case where government puts in a lot of money. In the US example, trillions, but in the form of backstops. These don't create demand, they just prevent demand from getting worse through things like paycheck protection, through things like loan deferments, through things like loan guarantees, things that prevent the problem from getting much worse than they already are, but don't really juice the economy. If you want to juice the economy, you may have to go to the right-hand column, which actually is things like infrastructure spending, basically replacing private demand with public demand, temporary or more permanent, in order to stimulate the economy. And we have not really seen that in most economies to date. China has done some of that more recently, but most countries have not. And that makes sense, right? Because you're telling people, please stay home. It's also hard to tell them, go out and build roads. Though we don't, we think this may come about in the future again if conditions cause that, but at least for now, we don't see that happening. The left-hand column is the case where, because the country does not have a fiscal capacity to do so, essentially the economy just starts to degrade very rapidly because the government is just unable to put in the money required to keep the economy from tanking. And the reason we have these 9 scenarios is we think that for companies and for organizations in general, forecasting is a dangerous game right now. And part of the reason it's a dangerous game right now is because nobody really knows what's going to happen. Very few people in modern times have lived through the flu pandemic of 100 years ago. And besides, the world is a little bit different now than before. And second of all, given the pace at which things are changing and numbers are changing on a daily basis, if you're trying to plan, your life, your company's life, your NGO's life, the university's life, based on constantly changing phenomena, you'll end up not being able to do much at all. So what we instead suggest is using a framework like this one or a different one, saying, here's kind of the bookends of all the things that could happen. Against each of these or a subset of these, let me think about what it is that I would do. What are the warning signals that I want to put in place so I can figure out which one of these I'm in, and essentially then follow the path as you learn which one you're in, as opposed to revising your forecast plans on a weekly, monthly basis just because something changed. And this is a key way of getting out of cognitive bias, because otherwise what ends up happening is you anchor around the most recent data without seeing kind of the bigger picture. Next page, please. We also have surveyed a large number of executives, about 2,000 of them worldwide, to see what it is that they think is going to happen. And what you'll see is a little bit also of more recent data and what that's driving executives to thinking. So the vast majority of people think we're in the middle box, and the number is getting larger. Just a reminder, this middle box is the case where A, the virus does come back a second time around, requiring significant action, and B, while you have backstops to prevent the economy from sliding even worse than it would under such circumstances, it is not in any way juiced through things like infrastructure spending. What you also find is that people are fairly worried about the left-hand scenario as well, where the economy really does tank into something that we've not seen before since the Great Depression. So broadly speaking, executives at least are quite worried about some of the more dire cases as opposed to some of the more optimistic one. If you look at the stock market and try to figure out what the stock market is trying to tell us, it actually is much more like A3. They actually think it's a one and done, and then we get back to normal very soon, as opposed to the Nike swoosh type scenario that you see in A1. And if, while the survey doesn't tell you why the executives believe this to be true, if you actually talk to them one-on-one, they will tell you the reason is they are quite worried about a few things. One, that we don't have enough testing worldwide. Two, that we don't have the contact tracing well established. Three, is that businesses, governments, everybody doesn't quite have the return to work methodology perfectly nailed down that will allow us all to be safe. There's just too much uncertainty in that, and too much variance, as a result of which people actually believe that there will be a return of the virus and we'll get back into the middle row. Next page, please. So what does this look like? So let's actually start with A3, which is the kind of greenish scenario, the one that the stock market loves to talk about. Here what we see is a real GDP drop of about 6.5% in the second quarter worldwide, which is pretty large. The A1 scenario, which is 2 away, looks like it's only 2 percentage points in GDP higher, but that 2 percentage points is massive. You're talking basically about trillions of dollars that have wiped out in going from an A3 to an A1 scenario. And part of the reason for that is not just the dip, but how long it takes to come back. If you look at the right-hand side, we're talking about a change in coming back to normal from end of this year to all the way in 2023. And while that might seem a long time away, it really isn't for two reasons. The great financial crisis, which was just 10 years ago, was much shallower than what this crisis is going to be. Yet it took over 3 years to come back. So in some sense, the A1 scenario, the one that takes to 2023, is actually not that bad at all. The recovery is actually faster than the great financial crisis. The only reason it takes so long is because the depth is so much larger. If you look at the B2 scenario, you actually get into a much more stressful situation where the world actually takes into the middle of 2023, and we show the US numbers, it's even worse in terms of how the B2 scenario plays out. The A2 scenario, where essentially you have a lot of juicing of the economy later in the year, actually allows us to get a little bit better by allowing us to come back to normal sometime at the end of next year. But that, on a worldwide basis, would require most countries to put in a stimulus of an infrastructure type stimulus sometime end of this year or early next year. Next page, please. So that's the world. Let's talk about the page before this one, the US one. So let's talk about the US, where most of us might be from, and at least where MIT is from. Here, what you see is something quite a bit more complicated. The V-shaped scenario on A3 is the same, but if you look at the A1 scenario, the light cyan one, it takes into 2021 to actually get back to normal, which is, again, like I said, 3 years away. So if you're planning your company's business around this, you got to think to yourself, what did I do in the last crisis? Is that going to be similar to what we see here? And thus, what am I going to do in terms of a planning perspective to do that? Because the difference between A1, for example, and A3 is stark. You don't want to plan only around A3 in case it turns out to be A1 and you don't have money. But if you end up essentially hiding your cash under your mattress because you think A1 is true and A3 becomes true, you essentially have lost a large amount of potential. So one thing that we've done some analysis on and shown is that in some sense, crises are the best time to retool, if you will, and companies that come out of a crisis better position actually do much better for the next decade or so, till the next crisis. It's almost like car racing or speed skating. You don't win the race on the straight parts, you actually win the race on the turns. So if you want to come out of this well, you actually got to plan now and come out of it, not just having your cash under the mattress, but ready to go on offense, if you will. And so as a result of which, if you don't know if A3 or A1 is going to be the right answer, essentially you have to plan around both and then watch for the warning signs so you can activate plan A versus plan B as the time comes. If you go to the next page, this is essentially looking at all of the various recessions since 1900. Even the optimistic scenario, A3, is the worst at the peak, is the worst scenario since the Great War. And A1 is almost a little bit worse than that and rivals anything since the Great Depression. These are pretty bad scenarios to think about. So even if we look at the fact that we may come back to normal by the end of this year, if everything goes perfectly according to plan, which not everyone believes, you still end up in a state where you're in sizable damage. Next page, please. And this again is a different way of looking at it. This is just to bring the one point, which is that the A1 scenario, the dark blue one here, the recovery slope, if you will, is still faster than the slope of the great financial crisis. So when people say that we're being very pessimistic, we don't think we are at all, because we actually have a reasonable recovery in that scenario. If you go to the B2 scenario, it's actually much, much worse. Now, what can we do about it? So what we've been doing in McKinsey is actually not just relying on the government data, partly because the government relies on being extremely accurate, which means that what they do is they spend a lot of time collecting data, et cetera. But the flip side is a bunch of the data comes only on a weekly basis, and most of it's on a monthly or quarterly basis. The problem is, if you want to figure out how as a consumer you want to behave, or how as a business you want to behave, or how as a nonprofit management you want to behave, you kind of need to have data that is much more real time. So what we've been doing is collecting over 50 to 60 data sources to look at what exactly is happening in the world. And some of these things are actually quite fascinating. So I want to point our attention on a couple of things. So let's talk about spend in department stores and spend on apparel. There's an early hypothesis that what would happen is simply that we would still buy stuff. We just would buy stuff online on things like Amazon. And what's ended up happening is, yes, some of that did happen. In fact, there is increased digital spending, but the total spending went down massively. It's not as if Americans simply switched channels, they actually just stopped spending. And some of it, of course, will come back and come out of the recession. The key question is, how will the spending come back, and will it be fast enough to actually make a difference? Same thing on restaurants. That makes sense, right? A large amount of restaurant spending goes down because you're not allowed to go to them anymore, and not everyone's open for takeout. The question is, what happens when you come back? So for this, we have to look at other countries, for places like China or East Asia, or even places like Sweden, where it was never fully closed. And what you find even there is that, yes, the restaurants are open. And all of us have seen fantastic pictures of people at bars drinking away and so on. But if you actually look at the actual level of activity in these areas, it is not the same as it was pre-crisis. People are worried about their health, as a result of which they're not going to these places at the same rate as they were pre-crisis. So even if you open up, we actually have to watch to see how Americans are going to behave. Are they going to go back at the same density or not? And if we do follow other countries, the answer is not till we're all confident that we're not going to get sick again. There are a couple of other interesting things that we've seen in the data, and I'll point out two other ones: telemedicine and television. Telemedicine in many countries, including Asia as well as the US and Western areas, has always suffered. People just don't like seeing the doctors on a phone. Right now, we don't have a choice. We have to go and go to the doctor by phone. It turns out people are getting used to it, and people are actually enjoying the experience. Why? It turns out people realize they didn't like waiting in a doctor's office either. So if you have to compare waiting in a doctor's office versus talking to a doctor on a phone, for many things, the phone is just fine. Similarly, what we're finding is that people are realizing that teleeducation has actually got some benefits compared to the traditional channels as well. And so what we think is going to happen is not that everything is going to switch to digital, but that use of digital in some of these channels is going to stay even past the end of this crisis, just because it actually is something that people have actually gotten used to. I'm just going to have two more slides, and I would love to open it up to questions. The other thing that we want to talk about is the fact that this recession is not uniform. And I'll use this slide as one, but also give you a couple more facts. The first one is that certain industries are massively impacted compared to others. Some of these are obvious. For example, aerospace and travel. People are not allowed to travel as much anymore. And on top of that, people don't want to. So it's down a lot. Banks are severely impacted for two reasons. One is they lend to many of these companies. But on top of that, what they also have is interest rates set by the Fed of near zero, which is also very bad for their income. Oil and gas, we have a massive reduction in oil demand. And in some countries, people are asking, when you return back to normal, do you want to return back to the same kind of economy, or do you want to return to a different economy? In which case, the long-term prognosis could be very different. On the other side, you see things that may make sense as well. So retail is not doing as badly, largely buoyed by things like grocery stores. Pharmaceuticals are doing quite well. And tech is doing extremely well, in part because of the switch to digital. So as you think about your own businesses, your own organizations, your own customers, your own vendors, you have to think about, well, which industry are they in? Where are they located? Who are your vendors? To see how they're going to do as you plan your own companies and your own organization's forward-looking plan. For example, if you're, let's call it in a B2B type business, you have to figure out, well, many of your customers may right now have money problems. Some of them are going to come back. Some of them are not. How do you deal with the different customer base that you have? Hard question, but I think thinking about it from an industry perspective is quite important. Same with your vendors. Many of your vendors may be in financial problems right now. Are they going to stay with those financial problems or not? If they are, then do you have backup plans? How do you deal with such supply chain issues? Things to think about and plan around. On the consumer side, by our estimate, about 45 to 55 million Americans have very, very vulnerable jobs as we speak, which is about a third of the workforce. Now, quite sadly, 86% of them make less than 40K a year. So this is impacting the population, not uniformly, but in a very, very non-uniform fashion. And this has quite large consequences on the longer term prognosis of those individuals' lives, but also how the economy can handle all of the specific jobless issues that we will have when it's so concentrated in a smaller group of people compared to the larger group. As a result of which, here are some hypotheses on the last page that we've been thinking about. So we divide this into three categories, and things to just think about as you think through your own lives and those of your organizations. It's very low likelihood that herd immunity is going to solve the problem before the vaccine. The levels are too low, and it takes a while for us to get to enough herd immunity to actually make a difference. For the flu, for example, it's about 70%. We will need something like massive testing. I've talked about this already. And the white swan is things like therapeutics. Key question, in the Western world, are we willing to consider limitations on privacy for health? We took such a hit on privacy after 9/11 for the purpose of safety, perceived or real. Are we willing to do the same thing for health? A few things to think about on the macroeconomic side. We very well could see social distancing through 2021 in large parts of the world. How will we have an economy that looks like that? I just mentioned the inequality gap because of the specific folks who are getting more unemployed. It's already bad today. It's going to significantly worse. Is our economy and the society ready for that? We probably have passed peak globalization, and as people think about supply chains, you may start to get regionalization of supply chain. How does that impact your companies, your lives? How is that going to impact the order of the economy as we see today and the organizations that support the globalized economy versus not? How do we think about life versus economic growth? A large number of places are opening up, knowing fully well that more people are going to die. What is that balance we're going to have to do as society to think about balancing those two? Often the folks who are making the decisions on opening up the economy are not going to be the ones who are likely to die. So how do you make that decision? Another one that we haven't talked about as much, debt to GDP is going to reach World War II levels probably 1 decade earlier than originally planned in the US. The CBO's estimate in the beginning of the year was 2035. It's probably closer to 2025 now. There's only 3 ways to get out of it, assuming we want to get out of it. Rapid growth, which has limits, inflation, which generally we don't like, or higher taxes, which we also don't like. So what combination of the 3 are we going to do, or are we just going to find a way to live with higher debt to GDP? Oil, huge part of the world economy. What's it going to look like given the work from home, lower travel, and the parallel interest in sustainability? Post-crisis, we have to think about a few things. Supply chain, how do we actually, what is the balance going to be between efficiency in the supply chain versus resilience? Resilience costs money. How much resilience do we want if the pandemic and such things only happen once every few decades? What does the healthcare market look like given that it's growing so rapidly as a result of this crisis and may last a while till we get this back to normal? How do we think about business travel, given that many of us have realized that, me included, that being home actually has benefits? It won't be quite back to, I do intend going back to traveling, but maybe not to the same level. How do we think about the brick and mortar? So for example, many stores right now are operating as fulfillment centers. You basically go to the curb, pick up stuff and move on. Is that the new normal? If so, what does it mean for malls? What does it mean for crime? Because if you have a whole bunch of malls that are suddenly closed down because people are not doing such stuff anymore, those are places where crime, for example, will increase. And how do you manage that? How do you think about digital? What does stay digital? What doesn't? And of course, as a result of which, software remains king. And tech companies already have grown significantly in the last 10, 15 years, may continue to do so and push into other parts of our lives that they haven't become a part of, and I'll be comfortable with that. So these are various kind of hypotheses and headlines we think about. We don't say we have the answers to these, but these are things that we encourage everybody to think about as they think not just about their organizations and how to plan around it, but also their own lives and the society they live in. Because these will be, what we have to potentially live through for the next many, many years. And some of these will be permanent. So once again, the way we think about this is it's a signature moment and the imperative of our times because it's all about saving our lives, the health, and our livelihoods, which is not just the economy, but also our society. A complicated problem, but this is what we're all going to face. So I'll stop here and take questions.
Arvind, thank you so much for sharing that analysis. That was really fascinating to see how many scenarios are being considered and what some of the key indicators for those scenarios are. So to bring you a logistical question to start from many audience members, people would like to know if you'd be willing to share these slides in any form.
Yeah, I'll just go through all of them again. I believe the answer is yes, so that should be fine.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question I'd like to bring to you is how much the availability of a vaccine would shift the recovery timeframe?
So there's two elements to the vaccine. One is its existence. Second one is at scale production. So if we just think about the amount of flu vaccines we use a year, it's a lot. And what we don't understand in the coronavirus is a few things. One is, will it mutate? Let me rephrase. It definitely mutates, like all viruses do. And in fact, the mutation is how people are tracking, which part of the world different people got the coronavirus from. So definitely mutates. The question, will it mutate in a form that the vaccine will stop working? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. If the answer is yes, then we got to get to a scale like the flu vaccine, where we reproduce a new one every single year before the season starts. So what we assume here is that the vaccine will be available at scale to vaccinate a large chunk of the population about a year to year and a half from now. If it is faster than that, then yes, you could imagine it being more of an A2 type situation. We don't see any situation where the vaccine is available at such a large scale to make any difference this year, just because we're almost halfway through it already. Second element in vaccine production is, unlike a drug, which you can just stop taking, you can't just stop taking a vaccine. You're either vaccinated or you're not vaccinated. As a result of which, generally vaccines go through sizably more thinking around things like safety than normal drugs, because of the fact that once you're immunized and vaccinated, it's done. So in spite of the recent safety as well as efficacy results that we've seen, it's not simply the matter of we start producing in July and vaccinate the population, right? So it takes some amount of time, which I think is why people are very excited, but at the same time somewhat realistic as well, that this is not a tomorrow solution.
Got it, thank you. Next question then, what are some of the key signals that you're tracking to determine which of these 9 scenarios will become more likely over time?
Great question. So I think we think about it in essentially 2 different parts. One is we are very, very cognizant of the health situation. So what we're looking at there is a few things. We actually look at number of cases in various jurisdictions. In the US, you can get it often by county level as well. But it actually, and this is kind of a sad state of affairs, but nevertheless true, we actually also look at the number of deaths. And part of the reason for that is the number of cases is hard to figure out because of things like testing, etc. Whereas the number of deaths is a little bit more reliable. Not perfectly reliable. It turns out that we're undercounting that as well, but nevertheless easier to look at. If we look at the raw numbers themselves, we actually look at the shape of the curve. So for all of us quant-friendly people, both the first and second derivatives of the increase in deaths or the decrease in deaths to take to figure out what the long-term prognosis starts to look like. In part because there is a lag between when you might be infected to when you show symptoms, if at all, to when you actually end up with a serious case to when you die. It takes at least a couple of weeks to start to see a change, and a little bit longer to get to death. So looking at the shape actually is quite helpful. The second thing we look at also is testing and the amount of positive tests. So as the number starts to decline and eventually plateau, you'll actually get a sense of what the actual profile looks like within a given place. And that helps us understand what the real level of infection is and what level is appropriate. The bad news is we don't know yet what level is appropriate, but at least we first want to understand when we've actually seen the plateau, and over time we can compute what the appropriate level might be. On the economic side, we look at a few things as well. We look at kind of near-term indicators. So we do look at jobless claims, we look at consumer spending, we're looking at people's movements, we're looking at changes in behavior between online digital channels. We're also looking substantially at sentiment. So we actually conduct a lot of proprietary surveys at McKinsey of consumers as well as businesses, in part to gauge how people are thinking about the future as well. Because a large amount of this is a confidence game. After 9/11, after hurricanes, people go back to their lives when they feel they're going to be safe. Until then, they don't. And as a result of which, this will allow us to say what will happen a little bit farther down the road based on consumers' actual answers, as opposed to just looking at data, which is a little bit of a lagging indicator.
Got it. Thank you. Check some other questions here. So we've already talked a little bit about how helpful it has been to look at public health approaches from other countries. What do you think the limitations are on different countries successfully adapting one another's strategies? So we had one question, for example, that said that it seems like there's been a lot of sharing of best practices between medical professionals, but not as much direct adoption of tracking policies, for example.
Yeah. So I think I answered that in a couple of ways. I mean, ultimately, there's a bit of a philosophical question, right? And I think this comment I made about privacy versus health is a big one. I think what you'll find is some societies are willing to be quote unquote more societal, if you will, in outlook. Other ones are not, and there's no right answer. It just is a philosophical societal choice. So I think to some extent, it's not only the sharing of practices; it's the willingness of a given society to pick one versus the other. And there is no right answer to this, right? So that's one. Second of all, I think what I would say is at the public, even on things like this, I think the actual sharing information actually is quite good. I mean, we serve a number of public health institutions throughout the world, and they know what works in other countries, and they have channels to talk to them. The difficulty is more around how do you actually make the decision in a given jurisdiction, do something, because it's not simply an algorithm of this will do X, hence it do Y. There are a number of constraints on things, for example, like the societal demand, the damage to the economy, a little bit of uncertainty, demographics, et cetera, that actually make this much more complicated. So it's more of a decision-making issue, less around a knowledge sharing issue, I would say is the real concern. Now, in terms of companies and organizations sharing best practices, there probably could be some improvement in that. So, many people are trying different things and how to make their own companies safer. And we've hosted a ton of webinars, for example, for different folks on how to return back to work. Some of it is on our website if you guys want to go there and take a look. The answer is nobody knows the right answer, and everyone's willing to share to some extent what bringing people back to work ought to look like. So there is some sharing of it, but I think because we don't know the right answer yet, there probably could be a little bit better action on sharing those aspects as well. How do we actually get this to work better as opposed to what's happened in the past?
Thank you. So another question similar to the theme of sharing. So you talked on this slide about the idea that we may have past peak globalization, and that was something that several people asked about in various ways. Do we really think that we've hit the limit in terms of how much people are willing to globalize industry and so on? And people would be interested in hearing you say a little bit more about where we expect to see declines in globalization.
Yeah, so I think so this is I would say if you look at the list here, probably the top or the second from the top most controversial thing even within McKinsey. And the reason is globalization has had tremendous advantages in certain metrics, right? It has helped in bringing up the quality of life in a number of countries. It has helped in things like reducing the cost of various goods and making things cheaper and so on and so forth. There are definitely quite a few benefits that have come from globalization and the optimization of supply chains and so on. Other metrics, of course, have been worse in the sense of supply chains have gotten to be less resilient because we've optimized on efficiency. Certain parts of the world have suffered from globalization. Certain parts of society suffer from globalization. So nothing, is a full-on victory, but there have been some benefits. Now, the question really, and the reason that we have a big raging debate in the firm as well is currently a number of companies are telling us they want to increase the resiliency of their supply chains. But at the same time, let's assume the crisis ends in let's call it 2021, and by 2024, will we still care? That's the question. So what we think about is you may end up with not less globalization, but definitely more regionalization. So even within the Americas, there are many places where you could run a supply chain through that actually have fairly efficient labor markets, etc. Right? So, for example, Mexico has got lower labor costs than large parts of the world. And by some measures, China and Mexico, for some industries, actually is close to on par. So what we think will happen is in cases where you get increased resiliency with not much of a cost or no change in cost, you will see much more regionalization. In cases where there's a vast difference in cost between a regional approach versus a global approach, that's going to be much slower. So we think what's going to happen is it's going to be a little bit more dependent on individual industries. There will be much more of an interest in resilience, but not to say that everything starts to become regional, because I think at some point in time, cost of goods also becomes somewhat important.
Okay, that sort of trade-offs makes sense. Thank you for explaining that. So a lot of people had questions about how we're going to handle the growing public and private debt. And people had various questions like, do we expect inflation will be allowed to rise? What are the most likely outcomes in terms of how we hope to control debt?
That's the second hottest topic in McKinsey, I would say, is on that aspect. And the reason is as follows, right? So I think the last crisis taught us a couple of things. One is that if you don't spend in the crisis, you have a world of pain afterwards. So I think most people would say that spending now is probably a good idea. So I think in some sense we don't have a choice. And the other way you can think about this also is, unlike what happened in the last crisis, if we look at credit default swaps of individual sovereigns, let's take Latin America. If you look at the certain countries that are spending more, and I think it's Peru that's spending more than it's one of its neighbors, even though they started with similar credit default swaps before the crisis, the neighbor has gone down, Peru's has stayed up in part because of they're spending more than their neighbors. The general belief is that if a country's economy tanks, they're likely to default at some point in time, at least have some way out if I spend some money out of it. Second question is, well, how much debt is bad? And this is a much more convoluted question for which I only have a partial answer, and there's a range of answers out there. There are many countries with debt far higher than ours. But what ends up mattering a little bit, I think, is A, who owns the debt, and B, what your status is in the world economy. For example, most of Japanese debt is owed to its own people. So in some sense, it doesn't really matter as much to the Japanese and to some extent Chinese as well compared to us. But most of our debt is widely owned. A lot of it, in fact, is still owned by us. So Social Security actually owns the greatest amount of federal debt to some extent. And to some extent, government agencies own other parts of government agencies' debt and things that are convoluted like that. So a sizable amount of US debt is also owned internally, but not to the same levels as Asia. But we do have the benefit, at least currently, of being the reserve currency, which means to some extent our debt is actually quite sought after. And in almost every crisis, our interest rates actually drop, not rise. So in some sense, in the US, we actually have a different advantage in that our debt is widely used in part because we're the reserve currency, and that gives us some of the buffer. And it takes a long time to change reserve currencies. So even if countries want to do it today, they're not going to be able to pull it off anytime soon because ultimately you need liquidity and so on and so forth, which is going to take time to get to there. So we have some time to worry about it. Other countries may have more of a problem. So basically, if you have a history of defaulting and you're not a reserve currency and you're not a country where you own most of your debt and your debt is denominated in other people's currencies, you might have a bit more of a problem. The other side is around things like inflation. I think we've been talking about potential of increased inflation for now over a decade and a half, and inflation has stubbornly stayed low. In fact, it stubbornly has stayed lower than the Federal Reserve actually wants. So could it increase? Theoretically, yes. Will it increase? I don't think we have any way of saying that, because every time we predict it's going to increase, it has done exactly nothing of the sort. So I think at least my viewpoint is that there's no reason to expect it to increase just because that's what the recent data tells us, even though conventional belief might lead you to believe that it in fact should increase given the amount of stimulus and stuff that are putting into the system. One point is the stimulus is indirect, it's not direct. So in some sense, yeah, we've seen the debt and so on, but the debt is in the form of indirect contributions to the economy, not direct.
Thank you. So turning the conversation to the role of individual organizations or companies, what advice would you give to private sector companies on their role in facilitating recovery, separate from whatever the government is trying?
So I think private sector has a huge role. And I mean private sector, I don't just mean the government, I also will include NGOs and all of the wonderful organizations doing great work out there. A couple of things. I think from a pure health perspective, anything that you guys can do to make the return back to work as safe as possible will go a long, long way. Because all the scenarios you pointed out to depend on return back to work without the virus coming back. And where part of that involves people going to restaurants and beaches and parks, a good chunk of that is how does your workplace going to deal with it, right? Cleaning, distancing within the workplace, enforcing those guidelines actually matter a lot. So I think that's the more potentially obvious one, but the one that we should bring about nevertheless. The second one I would say is in terms of how we think about customer assistance, and I'm going to use this term somewhat broadly. So we often think of customer assistance as being, a mom and pop trying to get a bank loan or something, right? But many of us actually work in companies that have other companies as potential customers, and to some extent, what's happening is you as a company have to balance between assisting the customer, which has benefits in the sense that they may stick with you longer, but you also have your own balance sheet to think about as well. And to some extent, what we say is, look, this is why scenario planning is important, is to figure out exactly how is it that your various customers might behave in the short term and the long term, and appropriately plan your assistance to them accordingly. Whether it's letting a little bit of AR slide or letting loan deferments, etc., to make sure that you as a company are resilient against your vendors or your customers going under, which will allow you to come back faster as well. So why does this matter for the economy? If every company thinks in a resilient fashion, such that they're able to come back under a range of scenarios, then the economy comes back faster. If a range of companies get this wrong and end up with mass bankruptcies or a much slower return back to normal, then you end up in a state the economy just doesn't come back for a while. So I would say that every company starts to act in, and every organization starts to act in a fashion that is well thought through and rational, you'll end up with a much faster return to the economy compared to normal.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one last question. And the question I'll bring to you is more about the cultural impact of a massive shift to work from home. So many people were wondering, what are people going to want in terms of leisure activities or recreation once work from home has been more normalized? Will this have impacts on the amount of office real estate that is being consumed? What are some of the major predictions in that area?
Yeah, and this one is an open question as well, because work from home right now is in part a lack of choice, and I think some people enjoy it, other people want to go back to work for a number of reasons, right? And so, if you recall the work from home phenomenon in the tech industry a little while ago, some companies embraced it and did well. Many companies returned back to no work at home because they actually saw over a longer term a productivity decline. Right now, we have not seen the decline, in part because we're in a crisis, and so people are acting like that and behaving accordingly. But on the flip side, what's making work at home harder now, especially with those folks with kids, is that kids are also home, which makes work from home much more complicated than it potentially needs to be in the future. So what we see is essentially a couple of things. We think that there will be, in some pockets, an increase in work from home, at least till the pandemic goes away, because if it works and coming back to the office place at high density is going to be a problem, then there's no need to return back sooner rather than later. This in some sense should reduce the need for office space. On the flip side, what's going to happen as well is in places where you have to bring people back, you have to bring people back at lower densities. So you actually will need more office space. It may not be in the same, urban center that you see now. It may be in a suburban area, but you may actually want more office space to put your employees in a lower density situation. So the way we think about it is that work from home is right now high. It will go back down because there are definite downsides to it from doing everything from home. Office space need will be a little bit balanced by those two. We still think there'll be a decline overall, but not to the same extent you might expect, because you'll need actually lower density of office space, and all of these Dilbertian cubicles will have to have some more space between them in the years going forward. So we don't think it'll be as bad as people think it is in the longer term because of those aspects.
All right, thank you so much for all the insights that you've shared with us today, and for your time in speaking with us. I believe that if you are willing to share the slides, what will happen is that they'll be emailed out to attendees afterwards, but please expect to hear follow-up communication about this either way, I think. So overall, thank you again for this presentation. The MIT Alumni Association thanks you for taking the time to be with us and for sharing your work with fellow alumni from around the globe. In addition, thank you to all of our alumni viewers for tuning in. As a reminder, the webinar will be on the Alumni Association's YouTube channel under the Career Lunch and Learn playlist after about a week from today, so you can also find the presentation recording there. If you have questions, please email us at alumnicareers@mit.edu. Thank you all again for tuning in. I hope you have found some new inspiration for how you can help those around you cope with all these changes and uncertainty, and enjoy the rest of your afternoons.
Thanks, everyone, and for spending time with me today.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.